You're about to make a decision that could change everything, and deep down, you're not sure if it's right. You feel overwhelmed, your thoughts won't slow down, and the silence from God feels louder than anything else. You've been praying, asking for clarity, asking for peace, but instead you feel stuck between fear and pressure, like no matter what you choose, something might go wrong. And here's what no one tells you about moments like this. When everything feels confusing, when anxiety rises and clarity disappears, it doesn't always mean you're lost. Sometimes it means something deeper is happening, something you can't see yet. Before you make that decision, there's a reason why this feels the way it does, and if you don't understand it now, you might rush into something you were never meant to choose. The decision that feels too heavy to carry. There are decisions that don't just sit in your mind, they settle into your chest. You feel them when you wake up, before you even open your eyes. It is the kind of weight that does not ask for permission, it just arrives and stays. And no matter how much you try to distract yourself, it keeps returning, reminding you that something important is at stake. This is not a casual choice. This is not something you can ignore and hope it disappears. This feels like a turning point, like one direction could lead to peace and the other could lead to regret. And that is exactly why your mind refuses to rest. You start replaying every possibility. You imagine outcomes, you predict consequences, you try to calculate what the future might look like depending on what you decide. But the more you think, the more complex it becomes. What once felt like 2 options now feels like 1,000 unknowns. And slowly, without realizing, the decision stops being about wisdom and starts becoming about fear. Fear of making the wrong move, fear of losing something important, fear of missing an opportunity that may never come back, fear of choosing something that looks right now, but reveals itself as wrong later. And this fear disguises itself as responsibility. It convinces you that you must get this right, that you cannot afford a mistake, that everything depends on your ability to see clearly right now. But that belief begins to trap you. Because when you believe everything depends on you, you start carrying a weight that was never meant to be yours alone. You start forcing answers instead of receiving direction. You start rushing clarity instead of allowing it to form. And this is where confusion begins to intensify. Your thoughts become louder but not clearer. Your emotions become stronger but not more reliable. One moment you feel certain, the next moment you feel doubt. One day you feel peace about a direction, the next day it feels completely wrong. And that instability begins to wear you down. You start questioning yourself. You start wondering if you are missing something obvious. You start doubting your ability to hear God at all. And in that space, something dangerous can happen. You become so desperate for resolution that you are willing to choose anything, just to escape the discomfort of not knowing. But rushing a decision is not the same as resolving it. Sometimes, the weight you feel is not because the decision is impossible. It is because you are trying to carry it in a way that is not aligned with how God leads. God does not lead through pressure. He does not guide through anxiety. He does not force clarity through fear. So if what you feel is heavy, urgent, overwhelming, there is something important you need to recognize. That weight may not be coming from the decision itself, but from the way you are approaching it. Because when God leads, there is direction even before there is full understanding. There is a quiet alignment, even if details are still unclear. But when you take control completely, trying to solve everything on your own, the process becomes heavier than it was ever meant to be. And this is the turning point you cannot ignore. What if the problem is not that God is silent, but that you are trying to answer something He never asked you to figure out alone? What if the weight you feel is actually an invitation to stop carrying it the way you have been? Because until you release the need to control every outcome, you will keep mistaking pressure for guidance and anxiety for urgency. And if you do not pause here, if you keep moving under that weight, you may end up choosing not from clarity, but from exhaustion. And that is how many people walk into decisions they later regret. Not because they were careless, but because they were overwhelmed. So before you go any further, before you try to think your way into an answer again, You need to face this honestly. Are you seeking direction? Or are you trying to escape the discomfort of not knowing? Because how you answer that will determine everything that comes next. When your mind speaks loud, but your spirit goes quiet, there is a moment in every difficult decision where your mind becomes louder than everything else. Thoughts start stacking on top of each other. Scenarios begin to multiply, and suddenly you are no longer thinking clearly. You are reacting internally to everything at once. It feels like urgency, but it is actually overload. You begin to analyze every angle, every consequence, every possible mistake you could make. You try to predict outcomes that have not even happened yet. And the more you think, the more your mind convinces you that the answer is just one more thought away. But it never arrives. Because what feels like progress is often just repetition. You go in circles, revisiting the same questions, the same fears, the same possibilities. And instead of getting closer to clarity, you feel further away from it. Your mind becomes active, but your spirit becomes quiet. And that silence begins to disturb you. Because you expected that if you prayed, if you asked God sincerely, something inside you would settle, that there would be a sense of direction, even if it was small. But instead you feel noise in your head and emptiness in your spirit. And that contradiction creates even more tension. So you try harder, you think more, you search more. You look for signs everywhere, trying to interpret every detail as a possible answer. But the more you chase clarity through your mind, the more distant it feels. And this is where many people get misled. They assume that the absence of clarity means God is not speaking. But what if the problem is not that God is silent, but that your mind is too loud to perceive what is already being shown? Because God does not compete with noise. He does not force his voice through anxiety. He does not increase volume to match your overthinking. His guidance often comes in a way that requires stillness to be recognized. And if your mind is constantly racing, constantly analyzing, constantly trying to control the outcome, you create an environment where that guidance becomes harder to perceive. Not because it is not there, but because there is no space for it to be noticed. Think about it. When your thoughts are overwhelming, even your emotions become unreliable. One moment you feel confident, the next moment you feel doubt. One moment something feels right, the next moment it feels completely wrong. And that instability is not direction, it is exhaustion. Because clarity does not come from thinking more, it comes from thinking differently. There is a difference between reflection and overthinking. Reflection brings awareness. Overthinking brings confusion. Reflection listens. Overthinking forces. And right now, you may be forcing something that was never meant to be forced. That is why your spirit feels quiet. Not because it has nothing to say, but because it is waiting for you to stop filling every space with your own voice. There is something inside you that recognizes truth when it is present. A quiet awareness that does not need to shout to be real. But it cannot be accessed when your mind is dominating everything. So instead of asking why God is not speaking, maybe the better question is, why is my mind so loud right now? What am I trying to control? What outcome am I trying to secure? What fear is driving me to keep thinking instead of trusting? Because until you slow that internal noise, every answer will feel uncertain. Every option will feel unstable. And every decision will feel like a risk you cannot afford. But the moment you begin to quiet that urgency, something shifts. You stop reacting, and you start observing. You stop forcing answers, and you start noticing patterns. You stop chasing clarity, and you begin to recognize what has been present all along. And that is where direction begins. Not in the loudness of your thoughts, but in the stillness your mind has been avoiding. So before you move forward, before you decide anything, there is something you need to do first. You need to create space again. Because if your mind keeps speaking louder than your spirit, you will keep missing what has been quietly guiding you this entire time. The hidden fear behind your urgency. There is a kind of urgency that feels productive, like you are being responsible, like you are taking action before it is too late. But there is another kind of urgency that does not come from clarity. It comes from fear. And if you are honest, that may be what is driving you right now. You feel like you need to decide quickly, like waiting will cost you something, like if you do not act now, you might miss the opportunity, lose the moment, or fall behind. And that pressure starts to build inside you, quietly at first, then stronger, until it begins to shape how you think. But pause for a second and look deeper. Where is that urgency really coming from? Because not every open door is a sign to move fast. Not every opportunity requires immediate action, and not every delay is a loss. Sometimes urgency is not direction. It is fear wearing the mask of importance. Fear of missing out, fear of being left behind, fear of losing control, fear of making the wrong decision and wishing you had acted sooner. And the problem with fear is not just how it feels, it is how it distorts. It makes temporary things feel permanent. It makes uncertain outcomes feel guaranteed. It makes you believe that if you do not act now, something valuable will disappear forever. But that is rarely true, because what is truly meant for you does not require panic to be reached. It does not depend on rushed decisions or pressured thinking. It aligns over time, not under pressure. And yet, when urgency takes over, you stop asking the right questions. You stop asking, is this aligned? And you start asking, how fast can I move? You stop asking, does this bring peace? And you start asking, what if I miss this? And without realizing, your decisions begin to shift from purpose to protection. You are no longer choosing based on where you are being led. You are choosing based on what you are trying to avoid. And that changes everything. Because fear-driven urgency always pushes you toward immediate relief, not long-term alignment. It wants resolution now, even if it costs clarity later. It wants certainty now, even if it leads to confusion afterward. And that is why so many people look back and say, I knew something felt off, but I moved anyway. They did not lack intelligence. They did not lack awareness. They were simply responding to pressure instead of discernment. So right now, you need to confront something honestly. If you removed the fear, would you still feel the same urgency? If you were not afraid of missing out, would this still feel like something you need to decide today? If there were no pressure, no timeline, no expectation, would this choice still feel the same? Because those questions reveal what is actually driving you. And if fear is behind it, then no amount of thinking will bring you peace. Because fear does not want peace. It wants control. It wants you to move fast so you do not have time to question it. It wants you to decide quickly, so you do not have space to see clearly. But God does not guide like that. God is not threatened by time. He is not limited by missed moments. He is not dependent on urgency to fulfill what He has for you. Which means if something truly aligns with His direction, it will not require you to abandon peace to reach it. So if you feel rushed, pressured, pushed to decide before you are ready, that is not something you should ignore. That is something you should examine. Because sometimes the very thing you feel like you must decide now is the one thing you need to step back from. Not to lose it, but to see it clearly. And if you do not slow down here, if you allow urgency to continue driving you, you will not just make a decision, you will make it for the wrong reason. And that is where regret begins. So before you move forward, ask yourself one question with complete honesty. Is this urgency coming from clarity, or is it coming from fear? Because your answer will determine whether you are being led or being pushed. Why clarity disappears right before important decisions. There is a pattern that most people do not notice until they are already inside it. The more important the decision, the less clear everything seems to become. What once felt obvious suddenly feels uncertain. What once felt right now feels questionable. And that shift can make you believe something is wrong. But what if nothing is wrong? What if the loss of clarity is not a failure in guidance, but part of the process itself? Because when a decision carries weight, it begins to expose everything attached to it. Your fears surface. Your desires become louder. Your past experiences start influencing how you see the present. And without realizing it, you are no longer just choosing between options. You are navigating everything inside you that has not been resolved. That is why clarity seems to disappear. Not because truth is absent, but because everything else is suddenly louder. Your past tells you what went wrong before. Your fear tells you what could go wrong again. Your desire tells you what you want to be true. And all of these voices begin to overlap, creating a kind of internal noise that makes it hard to distinguish what is real from what is reactive. And in that environment, clarity does not vanish. It becomes harder to recognize, because clarity is not always loud. It does not always come as certainty or immediate confidence. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is subtle. Sometimes it is simply the absence of confusion in one specific direction, even if everything else still feels unclear. But when you expect clarity to feel like total certainty, you begin to dismiss anything that does not match that expectation. You overlook the small sense of alignment. You ignore the subtle resistance. You keep searching for something stronger, something undeniable, something that removes all doubt. And that search keeps you stuck. Because real direction does not always eliminate doubt. It gives you enough awareness to move, not enough to control everything. And that is what makes this moment so difficult. You want full clarity before you act. You want to know the outcome before you commit. You want assurance that you will not regret what you choose. But that is not how growth works. There are moments where clarity is not given in advance. It is revealed through movement. Not reckless movement, not pressured decisions, but intentional steps taken with awareness, even when everything is not fully resolved. And this is where many people hesitate. They interpret the presence of uncertainty as a reason to stop, when sometimes it is simply a sign that they are at the edge of something that requires trust. Because if everything were clear, if every outcome were visible, there would be no need for discernment. There would be no need to rely on anything beyond what you can already see. But the reality is, the most important decisions are rarely made in complete clarity. They are made in moments where you have enough to move forward, but not enough to feel completely comfortable. And that discomfort is not always a warning. Sometimes it is an invitation to stop relying only on what you can understand and start recognizing what you can sense. Because even in confusion, there are signals. There is what drains you. There is what gives you a quiet sense of steadiness. There is what creates tension. And there is what, even without full explanation, feels aligned. But if you keep expecting clarity to remove all discomfort, you will keep missing those signals. You will keep waiting for a certainty that was never meant to come that way. And time will pass, not because you lacked direction, but because you did not recognize it in the form it was given. So instead of asking, "Why is everything unclear?" ask something deeper. What is being revealed through this lack of clarity? What inside me is being exposed right now? What fears, what patterns, what expectations are influencing how I see this decision? Because when you begin to see that, something shifts. You stop chasing clarity as a feeling and you start recognizing it as awareness. And awareness changes how you move. It slows you down, not in fear, but in understanding. It helps you see what is real and what is reaction. It creates space between what you feel and what is actually guiding you. And in that space, clarity begins to return, not as certainty, but as direction. And that is all you need. But if you miss this, if you keep believing that clarity should come as complete confidence, you will either rush into something just to escape confusion or stay stuck waiting for something that was never meant to appear the way you expect. And both lead to the same place, a decision made without true understanding. So before you move forward, before you decide anything, consider this. Maybe clarity has not disappeared. Maybe it is just being hidden beneath everything you have not yet faced. And if that is true, then the next step is not to search harder, it is to see deeper. The illusion of the perfect choice. There is an idea that quietly controls how you approach decisions, and most of the time you do not even realize it is there. The idea that somewhere among your options, there is a perfect choice, a decision that will lead to the best outcome, avoid all regret, and confirm that you got everything right. And because you believe that, you begin to search for it. You analyze every possibility, trying to identify which one carries the least risk, the most reward, the highest level of certainty. You compare scenarios, you imagine outcomes, you try to calculate the future as if it were something that could be predicted with enough effort. But the more you search for the perfect choice, the more impossible the decision becomes. Because perfection creates pressure. It convinces you that one wrong move could cost you everything, that if you choose incorrectly, you will lose something you cannot recover. And that belief does not bring clarity. It brings fear disguised as responsibility. You begin to feel like there is no room for error. And that is where the illusion traps you. Because there is no decision that comes with total certainty. There is no path that guarantees a life without challenge, without unexpected turns, without moments where things do not go as planned. And yet your mind keeps trying to find that guarantee. It keeps telling you, if you just think a little more, if you just analyze a little deeper, you will find the option that removes all doubt. But doubt is not removed through thinking. It is managed through trust. And this is what shifts everything. The goal is not to find the perfect choice. The goal is to recognize aligned direction. Because a perfect choice is something you try to control. Aligned direction is something you learn to follow. And those are two completely different approaches. When you are searching for perfection, you are trying to eliminate risk. You are trying to secure an outcome. You are trying to protect yourself from any possibility of regret. But when you are following direction, you are not focused on controlling the entire future. You are focused on taking the next step with awareness, even if the full picture is not visible. And that requires something your mind resists. It requires letting go of the need to be certain. Because certainty feels safe. It feels like control. It feels like protection against failure. But it can also become a barrier. It keeps you analyzing instead of moving. It keeps you comparing instead of deciding. It keeps you waiting for a level of confidence that may never arrive. And while you wait, something else begins to happen. You start to lose trust in yourself. You start to believe that if you do not feel completely sure, you should not move at all. That if there is any doubt, it must mean the decision is wrong. But that is not always true. There are moments where doubt is simply the presence of the unknown. It is not a warning. It is a reminder that you are stepping into something that requires growth. And growth does not come with guarantees. It comes with movement. So instead of asking which choice is perfect, you need to ask something more honest. Which direction carries a sense of alignment, even if it is not fully comfortable? Which option feels steady, even if it is not exciting? Which path remains consistent when emotions change, when fear rises, when external pressure increases? Because those are the signals that matter. Not perfection, not certainty, not the absence of doubt, but consistency beneath the surface. And if you pay attention, you will notice something. The options that look perfect often come with pressure. They demand quick decisions. They create emotional highs. They promise immediate results. But what is aligned often feels different. It does not rush you. It does not overwhelm you. It may not look impressive at first, but it carries a quiet stability that remains even when your emotions shift. And that is what you need to recognize. Because if you keep chasing the perfect choice, you will overlook the right one. You will ignore what is steady because you are searching for what is certain. And in that process, you may end up choosing something that looks ideal, but does not hold when reality unfolds. So before you go any further, you need to release something. The belief that there is a perfect decision waiting to be found. Because as long as you hold on to that, every option will feel incomplete, every step will feel risky, and every moment will feel uncertain. But the moment you let that go, something changes. You stop trying to control everything, and you start paying attention to what is actually being revealed. And that is where real direction begins. Not in perfection, but in alignment. And if you do not understand this now, you will continue searching for something that does not exist, while missing what has been quietly guiding you all along. When every option feels right and wrong at the same time. There is a point in certain decisions where everything starts to blur. You look at your options and somehow, each one makes sense and doesn't make sense at the same time. One path feels right when you think about it logically, but something inside you hesitates. Another feels emotionally appealing, but you can't fully trust it. And that internal conflict begins to exhaust you. You start asking yourself, how can something feel both right and wrong at the same time? And the more you try to resolve that tension, the more confused you become. Because you are expecting one option to feel completely clear and the other to feel completely wrong. You are waiting for a contrast that removes all doubt, but instead you are standing in a space where both directions carry both possibility and uncertainty. And that is deeply uncomfortable. Because your mind wants clarity through separation. It wants one answer to stand out so strongly that the other becomes irrelevant. But that is not always how real decisions work. Sometimes both options can lead to growth. Sometimes both paths can carry consequences. Sometimes what you are choosing between is not right versus wrong, but different kinds of experiences that will shape you in different ways. And that realization can be unsettling. Because if both paths hold value, then the pressure shifts. It is no longer about avoiding the wrong choice. It becomes about understanding what each path requires from you. And that is where deeper awareness is needed. Because when everything feels both right and wrong, it usually means the surface level evaluation is not enough. You are trying to decide based on external outcomes, visible benefits, immediate feelings. But the real difference is often hidden beneath that. It is in what each choice will demand from your character, your patience, your discipline, your trust. One path may require you to let go of something familiar. Another may require you to face something you have been avoiding. One may challenge your comfort. The other may challenge your expectations. And when you begin to see that, the confusion starts to change. It becomes less about which option feels better and more about which one aligns with who you are becoming. Because not every right option is right for you at this moment. And not every wrong feeling is a sign to avoid something. Sometimes discomfort is a signal of growth, not danger. And sometimes comfort is a signal of familiarity, not alignment. That is why relying only on how something feels in the moment can mislead you. Because feelings are influenced by many things: fear, past experiences, expectations, even exhaustion. And if you are already overwhelmed, your ability to interpret those feelings becomes even more unstable. One moment something feels right because it relieves pressure. The next moment it feels wrong because doubt returns, and you start to question everything again. And that cycle keeps repeating. But there is something important you need to understand. Clarity is not always about eliminating all mixed signals. Sometimes it is about recognizing which signal remains consistent beneath them. Because even when your emotions fluctuate, even when your thoughts go back and forth, there is often something deeper that does not change. A quiet sense of knowing, a subtle awareness, something that does not push, does not rush, does not fluctuate with every new thought. And that is what you need to pay attention to. Not the loudest feeling, not the most urgent thought, but the most consistent signal over time. Because when everything feels both right and wrong, the answer is not found in intensity, it is found in consistency. Which direction continues to make sense even after you step away and return? Which option still feels aligned when your emotions settle? Which path does not rely on convincing yourself, but instead feels steady without effort? Those are the questions that begin to separate confusion from direction. But if you keep chasing a moment where one option feels completely perfect and the other feels completely wrong, you will remain stuck, because that moment may never come. And the longer you wait for it, the more exhausted you become. So instead of trying to force a clear contrast, you need to shift your focus from what feels best in the moment to what remains true over time. Because in decisions like this, the answer is rarely loud, it is steady. And if you can recognize that steadiness, even in the middle of mixed feelings, you will begin to see something that was hidden before. Not a perfect choice, not a guaranteed outcome, but a direction that holds. And that is enough to move forward, i.e. the silence that tests what you really trust. There is a kind of silence that feels different from all the others. It is not just the absence of an answer, it is the absence of reassurance. You ask, you wait, you try to listen, but nothing seems to come back the way you expected. And that silence begins to challenge something deeper than your patience. It begins to challenge what you actually trust. Because when clarity is present, trust feels easy. When direction is obvious, confidence comes naturally. But when everything feels quiet, when no clear answer appears, you are faced with a different kind of question. Do you trust only when you understand? Or can you remain steady even when you do not? And that is where this moment becomes more than just a decision. It becomes a test of foundation. Because many people believe they trust God, but what they really trust is clarity. They trust the moments when things make sense, when direction is visible, when outcomes feel predictable. But when those elements disappear, their sense of trust begins to weaken. Not because they have no faith, but because their faith has been tied to certainty. And certainty is not always given. There are moments where silence is not a lack of response. It is a space where something is being formed inside you. A space where dependence shifts, where control is confronted, where the need for constant reassurance is slowly released. But that process is uncomfortable, because silence removes what you usually rely on. It removes quick answers. It removes emotional confirmation. It removes the sense that you are being guided step by step in a way you can immediately recognize. And in that space, your thoughts become louder, your doubts become stronger, and your need for resolution intensifies. You start wondering if you are missing something, if you are not hearing correctly, if something is wrong with you, if maybe God is not responding at all. But what if the silence is not about absence? What if it is about refinement? Because when everything is quiet, you begin to see what you are actually leaning on. You begin to notice whether your decisions are driven by peace or by pressure, whether your direction is shaped by trust or by fear, whether you are willing to move with limited understanding or only when everything is explained. And that awareness reveals more than any immediate answer could. Because answers can guide your next step, but awareness transforms how you walk. And that is what this silence is doing. It is not just delaying your decision, it is shaping the way you will make it. It is slowing you down enough to recognize what is influencing you. It is creating space for you to see what you normally overlook. It is removing noise so that when direction comes, you are able to recognize it without distortion. But if you resist this silence, if you rush to fill it with your own conclusions, your own assumptions, your own urgency, you interrupt that process. You replace formation with reaction, and that leads you back into confusion. Because the silence is not empty. It is active in a way that is not obvious. It is doing something beneath the surface that cannot happen when everything is loud and immediate. And that is why you cannot treat this moment as something to escape. You have to treat it as something to understand. Because what you learn here will affect every decision that follows. It will determine whether you move from trust or from fear, whether you act with awareness or react under pressure, whether you rely on what you can see or remain steady even when you cannot. And that distinction matters more than the decision itself, because the same choice made from fear and made from trust can lead to completely different outcomes. So instead of asking, "Why is God silent?" ask something deeper. What is this silence revealing about me? What am I holding on to that is making this harder than it needs to be? What am I afraid to release if I do not receive a clear answer right now? Because those questions will take you further than any immediate response ever could. And if you allow this moment to do its work, something begins to change. The silence stops feeling like distance. It starts feeling like preparation. And in that shift, you begin to understand something most people miss. God is not always guiding through answers. Sometimes He is guiding through what the silence is teaching you. And if you do not see that, you will keep searching for a voice that is already speaking in a different way. The subtle difference between peace and relief. There is a feeling you have been chasing without realizing it. You call it peace, but many times it is only relief. And the difference between the two can change everything about the decision you are about to make. Relief comes quickly. It appears the moment you imagine escaping the pressure. The moment you think about choosing something just to end the tension, just to stop overthinking, just to feel lighter again. And for a brief moment it works. You feel better. Your mind slows down. The weight seems to lift, but that feeling does not last, because relief is not rooted in truth. It is rooted in escape. It comes from ending discomfort, not from aligning with what is right. And that is why, after a while, the questions return. The doubt comes back. The same uncertainty you tried to leave behind begins to surface again. And when it does, it feels even more confusing. Because now you thought you had decided. You thought you had clarity. But something inside you is unsettled again, and you cannot explain why. That is the sign you followed relief, not peace. Peace does not behave like that. Peace is not always immediate. It does not always remove tension in an instant. Sometimes it arrives quietly, almost unnoticed at first. And even when it is present, it does not mean everything feels easy. There can still be questions. There can still be unknowns. There can still be moments where you wonder if you are doing the right thing. But beneath all of that, there is something steady, a sense that you are not forcing the outcome, a sense that you are not trying to escape discomfort, a sense that even if you do not have all the answers, you are not moving against something inside you. And that steadiness is what defines peace. It does not rush you. It does not pressure you. It does not demand immediate action just to feel better. It allows you to move without losing yourself in the process. And this is where many decisions go wrong. People mistake relief for guidance. They choose what feels easier in the moment, what reduces anxiety faster, what gives them a sense of temporary control. And because it feels good at first, they believe it must be right. But relief is driven by urgency. Peace is rooted in alignment. Relief wants the tension to end now. Peace allows the process to unfold without forcing it. And if you do not learn to recognize that difference, you will keep choosing based on how you want to feel in the moment, instead of what is actually guiding you forward. So pause and reflect honestly. When you think about your options, which one brings a quick sense of escape? Which one feels like it would immediately remove the pressure, even if you are not fully convinced? And then ask something deeper. Which one remains steady when you are not trying to convince yourself? Which one does not rely on you forcing a feeling, but instead holds a quiet consistency over time? Because that is where the truth begins to separate itself. Relief is loud at first and fades quickly. Peace is quiet at first and remains. And if you are not paying attention, you will follow the loud feeling because it is easier to recognize. It feels stronger, more immediate, more convincing. But what is loud is not always what is right. And what is quiet is not always what should be ignored. This is why slowing down matters. Because when you slow down, relief loses its urgency. It no longer feels as convincing as it did in the moment. And what remains is what was actually real from the beginning. That steady sense that did not need to rush you. That quiet awareness that did not need to prove itself. And once you see that clearly, your decision begins to change. You are no longer choosing based on what removes discomfort the fastest. You are choosing based on what holds, even when discomfort is still present. And that shift protects you. It keeps you from making decisions just to feel better. It leads you toward decisions that remain right even after the feeling changes. Because feelings always change, but alignment does not. And if you miss this, you will keep chasing relief, thinking it is peace, only to find yourself back in the same place, facing the same confusion, wondering why nothing truly resolved. So before you decide anything, ask yourself one question with complete honesty. Am I seeking peace or am I just trying to feel better right now? Because your answer will reveal more than anything else you have been thinking. The decision you're about to make may not be the real decision. There is something deeper happening beneath the surface of what you think you are deciding. You believe you are choosing between two options, two paths, two outcomes. But many times, that is not the real decision at all. The real decision is hidden underneath, because what you are facing is not just about where to go or what to do. It is about who you are becoming in the process of choosing. And if you do not see that, you will focus on the wrong level of the decision. You will analyze external details, compare visible outcomes, weigh practical advantages. And while those things matter, they are not the core of what is actually being decided right now. The real decision is internal. It is whether you will move from fear or from trust, whether you will act out of pressure or out of alignment, whether you will repeat patterns that feel familiar or step into something that requires growth. And this is why the confusion feels so intense. Because you are not just choosing a direction. You are confronting parts of yourself that have been shaping your decisions for a long time. Patterns you may not have fully recognized. The tendency to avoid discomfort, the need to control outcomes, the habit of seeking certainty before taking action, the fear of regret. And all of that is influencing how you see your options. So what feels like confusion is often deeper than uncertainty about the situation. It is uncertainty about yourself, about what you are ready to face, about what you are willing to release, about what you are willing to trust. And that is why no amount of external analysis fully resolves the tension. Because the answer is not only outside of you, it is within you. Think about it carefully. If you remove the external circumstances for a moment, what does each option require from you internally? Does one path require you to let go of control? Does another require you to face something you have been avoiding? Does one ask you to trust without guarantees? Does another keep you in something familiar, even if it is not fully aligned? Because those are the real differences. And when you begin to see that, the decision changes. It is no longer just about what looks better. It becomes about what is shaping you in the right direction. And that is not always comfortable, because growth rarely is. There are decisions that feel easy because they keep everything the same. They do not challenge you. They do not stretch you. They do not require you to confront anything deeper. And because of that, they feel safe. But safe is not always aligned. And there are decisions that feel uncomfortable because they ask something more from you. They require trust, patience, surrender, or courage in ways you are not used to. And because of that, they feel uncertain. But uncertain is not always wrong. This is the point where you need to shift your perspective completely. Stop asking only what will happen if I choose this. Start asking who will I become if I choose this. Because the outcome matters, but the transformation matters more. You can arrive at a good outcome with the wrong mindset and still find yourself repeating the same struggles later. Or you can move through a challenging path with the right alignment and become someone who is able to handle what comes next. And that is what God is often working on in moments like this, not just positioning you externally, but shaping you internally, preparing you, refining you, strengthening something in you that you will need beyond this decision. But if you stay focused only on the surface, you will miss that. You will choose based on comfort, on immediate results, on what seems easier to manage right now. And in doing that, you may delay the very growth that would have brought you into alignment. So before you move forward, pause and ask yourself something deeper than you have asked so far. What is this decision asking of me? Not just externally, but internally. What part of me is being challenged right now? What pattern is being exposed? What am I being invited to change, to release, to trust differently? Because once you see that clearly, the confusion begins to shift. Not because the options suddenly become obvious, but because you are no longer looking at them the same way. You are no longer trying to choose what feels easiest. You are choosing what aligns with who you are being called to become. And that changes everything. Because when you understand the real decision, the visible one becomes easier to navigate. But if you ignore this, you will keep trying to solve something externally that was never meant to be resolved that way. And you will remain stuck between options, not because there is no answer, but because you are looking in the wrong place. What your resistance is trying to reveal. There is something inside you that reacts the moment you get close to certain decisions. It tightens, hesitates, pulls back. and you interpret that resistance as a warning. You assume it means something is wrong, that you should avoid it, that stepping forward would be a mistake. But resistance is not always a signal to stop. Sometimes it is a signal to look deeper, because not all resistance comes from danger. Some of it comes from fear of change, fear of growth, fear of stepping into something that requires a version of you that you have not fully become yet. And if you do not understand that, you will misread what is happening inside you. You will avoid what is actually aligned, simply because it feels uncomfortable. You will step away from opportunities that challenge you, not because they are wrong, but because they are unfamiliar. And without realizing it, you will remain in what feels safe, even if it is not where you are meant to stay. But there is another kind of resistance, a quieter one, not driven by fear, but by misalignment. It does not come with panic. It does not create urgency. It does not overwhelm your thoughts. It simply does not settle. Something feels off even if you cannot explain it. You try to convince yourself it makes sense. You try to focus on the benefits. You try to ignore that internal signal, but it remains steady, consistent, unmoved by your attempts to rationalize it away. And that kind of resistance matters, because it is not reacting to change. It is responding to truth. So now you are faced with something that requires discernment. You need to understand the difference between resistance that comes from fear and resistance that comes from misalignment. And the only way to do that is to observe how it behaves. Fear-based resistance is loud. It is emotional. It creates stories about what could go wrong. It amplifies risk. It makes you feel like you are not ready, not capable, not prepared enough. It pushes you to stay where you are because that feels more controlled. But if you look closely, you will notice something. Even with all that noise, there is often a deeper sense that the direction itself is not wrong. The discomfort is not about the path. It is about what the path requires from you. And that is a very different thing. Alignment-based resistance, on the other hand, is not loud. It does not try to scare you. It does not create intense emotional reactions. It simply does not move. No matter how much you think about it, no matter how much you try to make it fit, no matter how much you attempt to justify it, something inside you remains unsettled. And that feeling does not come and go. It stays. That is the difference. Fear fluctuates. Alignment remains. Fear becomes stronger when you focus on it, but it can also weaken when you step back and gain perspective. Alignment does not depend on your focus. It does not change when your emotions change. It is consistent, even when everything else shifts. So the question you need to ask yourself is not, am I feeling resistance? The question is, what kind of resistance is this? Is it pushing me away because I am afraid to grow? Or is it holding me back because something is not right? Because how you interpret that will determine everything. If you mistake fear for misalignment, you will walk away from what could have transformed your life. If you mistake misalignment for fear, you will move into something that was never meant for you. And both lead to consequences that are hard to reverse. That is why you cannot rush this. You need to observe, not react. You need to create space between what you feel and how you respond to it. Because when you slow down, patterns begin to reveal themselves. You begin to see whether the resistance increases with pressure or remains steady regardless of it. You begin to notice whether it is tied to specific fears or if it exists independently of them. And in that awareness, clarity starts to form. Not because the resistance disappears, but because you understand it. And understanding changes how you move. You are no longer controlled by what you feel in the moment. You are guided by what remains true beneath it. And that is what protects you. Because the goal is not to eliminate resistance. The goal is to recognize what it is trying to show you. And if you do not take the time to do that, you will either avoid what you should step into or step into what you should have avoided. So before you make your decision, pause here. Do not try to silence the resistance. Do not try to push through it blindly. Look at it, understand it. Because what it reveals may be the very thing you have been missing. The moment you stop forcing, God starts aligning. There comes a point where trying harder no longer brings you closer to the answer. You have thought about it enough. You have analyzed every angle. You have replayed the possibilities so many times that nothing new is coming from it anymore. And yet something inside you keeps pushing, as if more effort will finally unlock clarity. But it does not. Because there is a limit to what force can produce. And that is the moment most people do not recognize. The moment where continuing to push is not progress, it is interference. You begin to tighten your control. You try to resolve everything at once. You want the answer now, the certainty now, the peace now. And that intensity starts to cloud everything. You stop seeing clearly. You stop listening. You stop noticing what is actually unfolding, because your focus is locked on getting a result. And that is where alignment becomes difficult to perceive. Not because it is not happening, but because you are trying to control how it should happen. Forcing creates noise. It creates urgency where there should be patience. It creates pressure where there should be awareness. It creates a sense that everything depends on your ability to make the right move at the right time. But alignment does not respond to force. It responds to release. And that is the shift that changes everything. The moment you stop trying to control every outcome, something begins to move differently. Not externally at first, but internally. Your thoughts begin to settle. Your emotions begin to stabilize. The intensity that was driving you starts to lose its grip. And in that space, something becomes visible that was hidden before. You start to notice patterns you overlooked. You start to recognize what has been consistent. You begin to see which direction has been quietly holding, even when your emotions were shifting. But this only happens when you stop forcing, because forcing keeps you reacting. It keeps you locked in a cycle where every new thought feels urgent. Every new feeling feels important. Every new possibility feels like something you need to resolve immediately. And that constant reaction prevents you from seeing what is steady. Alignment is not found in reaction. It is recognized in stillness. That does not mean doing nothing. It means releasing the need to control everything before you move. It means allowing space for things to become clear without demanding that they do. And that is not easy, because letting go of control feels like risk. It feels like you are leaving something too important unresolved. It feels like you might miss something if you are not constantly thinking about it. But what you need to understand is this: control does not guarantee clarity, and releasing control does not mean losing direction. It means allowing direction to reveal itself in a way that is not distorted by pressure. Because when you stop forcing, you begin to move differently. You are no longer chasing an answer. You are observing what is already present. You are no longer trying to create certainty. You are recognizing consistency. You are no longer reacting to every feeling. You are paying attention to what remains unchanged. And that is where alignment becomes clear. It is not something you build through effort. It is something you notice when the noise is gone. And often, the reason you have not seen it yet is not because it is absent. It is because you have been trying too hard to control how it should appear. So this is the moment you need to shift. Stop trying to force clarity. Stop trying to solve everything at once. Stop trying to control outcomes you cannot fully see. And instead, allow space. Because in that space, something begins to align. Not through effort, but through recognition. Not through pressure, but through awareness. And when that happens, the decision you have been struggling with starts to feel different. Not because everything becomes certain, but because you are no longer trying to carry what was never yours to control. And in that release, direction becomes visible. Not loud, not overwhelming, but clear enough to move. And that is all you need. You don't need all the answers. You need the right direction. There is something you have been waiting for without realizing it. Complete clarity, full certainty. A moment where every doubt disappears and every outcome becomes visible. You have been holding your decision hostage to that expectation, believing that once you have all the answers, then you will finally be able to move. But that moment rarely comes. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because that is not how direction is given. You are not meant to see the entire path before you take the first step. You are meant to recognize the direction that holds, even when the details are still unfolding. And this is where everything shifts. Because as long as you believe you need all the answers, you will remain stuck. You will keep analyzing, keep questioning, keep waiting for a level of certainty that was never meant to come in that form. And while you wait, life does not pause. Opportunities pass, timing changes. Internal clarity becomes harder to recognize, not because it is gone, but because it is buried under the weight of constant thinking. But the truth is simple, even if it is difficult to accept. You do not need to understand everything to move correctly. You need to recognize what is aligned enough to take the next step, because direction is not revealed all at once. It is revealed step by step, and each step requires a decision. Not a perfect one, not a guaranteed one, but a grounded one. A decision made from awareness, not from fear, from steadiness, not from urgency, from trust, not from control. And that is the kind of decision you are being invited to make right now. Not one that resolves your entire future, but one that aligns you with what is real in this moment. And if you pay attention, you already have more than you think. You have seen what creates pressure. You have recognized what feels forced. You have noticed what does not settle, no matter how much you try to convince yourself. You have also sensed what remains steady, even when your emotions change. That is direction. It may not feel complete, but it is enough. Enough to move, enough to trust, enough to take one step without needing to see the entire outcome. And this is where many people hesitate, because they believe that if they move without full clarity, they are taking a risk. But the real risk is not moving at all. The real risk is staying in a place of constant hesitation, where nothing is resolved and everything remains uncertain. Because waiting for perfect clarity does not protect you. It keeps you suspended. And in that suspension, confusion grows, doubt deepens, and the decision becomes heavier than it was meant to be. But the moment you shift your focus, everything begins to change. You stop asking, "Do I have all the answers?" And you start asking, "Do I have enough alignment to move?" And that question leads you somewhere different. It leads you out of overthinking and into awareness, out of pressure and into steadiness, out of fear and into trust. Because trust is not about knowing everything. It is about moving with what you know is true, even if it is not complete. And that is what God meets. He does not require you to understand the entire path. He responds to your willingness to move in the direction that aligns with what He is already showing you. And when you take that step, something happens that you cannot experience while standing still. More becomes clear. Not all at once. Not in a way that removes every question, but enough to guide the next step. And then the next. And then the next. That is how direction unfolds. Not through full visibility, but through continuous alignment. So before you close this moment, before you return to the same cycle of thinking and questioning, hold on to this. You are not being asked to figure everything out. You are being asked to recognize what is already in front of you. And if you can do that, if you can trust what is steady, release what is forced, and move without needing complete certainty, you will not just make a decision. You will move in alignment. And that is what protects you. Not perfection, not control, not having all the answers, but choosing direction when it is given, and that is enough.